My name is Clay Williams, and this is People Talks, presented by Canal Pursuit Productions. The idea behind People Talks is that everyone has a story, and everyone's story has value. People Talks is a mixture of people with lived experience and people who work in health and fitness fields, one speaker each week. This week's speaker is Brady Leibold. Brady is originally from Port Coquitlam, BC. Being sexually abused as a child left him confused and afraid, but he says it made him even a better hockey player. Hockey was his first drug, his outlet. He kept the abuse secret from everyone, and it ate away at him. He had a crazy World Hockey League career that saw him quit several times. Suicide attempts and drugs became a part of his life, and by the time he signed with the Tampa Bay Lightning, he was a full-blown cocaine addict. Shortly afterward, a knee injury led him to OxyContin, and a year later, he was no longer playing. Before long, he switched to heroin and was homeless until he spent 3 years in prison for various offenses. In February 2020, he got clean, and since then has started a podcast series and also started an organization called Puck Support with the purpose of bringing change to the hockey community through mental health and addiction awareness. And with that, I'll say welcome to People Talks, Brady.
Clay, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. And you gave her the Coles Notes version there. It's obviously been a great 14 months that I've been on this journey of this new life. But as you stated there in the introduction, it was from the time I was 5, it was a challenge. Just putting on these masks and trying to make sure that nobody knew that I was sexually abused by an older man. And I share this story, Clay, we can go right into that because, especially I think on the playground, at school, even in the dressing room as a young hockey player, kids can sometimes often be mean and sometimes they are doing it intentionally. Sometimes they're young and they're just throwing words around that maybe they don't understand. But when homophobic slurs started to be, tossed around, and I was kind of, I don't know. I don't know how to word it properly, but a little bit ahead of my age with education around sex and swearing and all these things, whether it was a group of friends I hung out with or what it was. So my understanding of things were maybe a little bit more ahead of others, but at the same time, being sexually abused was extremely confusing. And so when I started to hear these homophobic slurs and these labels get passed on to people, I made a decision pretty much instantaneously that I was never going to tell anybody that it happened to me because I didn't want to be labeled. And so that's what I did. I started to put on these masks and I found a ton of comfort in the beautiful sport of hockey. That was my life since I could remember. And I think, obviously, maybe had some natural athletic ability, was pretty good at all sports. And, but I'll tell you what that did to me being sexually abused. My parents were divorced shortly thereafter and just a troublesome time. And so throwing myself in the hockey was able to get pretty good at it. But never had the mental capacity, Clay, to really believe in myself and to give myself, any sort of credit or allow myself to dream. I was a damaged boy who was angry, confused, and there was no place in my head that would allow me to allow for greatness. I knew that maybe I was okay at hockey and my skill level was maybe at an elite level, but something in my head there was always just saying, you're not good enough. You don't deserve this right from day one. I was still able to make it to the Western Hockey League, played for the Swift Current Broncos and the Kelowna Rockets. And my junior hockey career was an absolute disaster. Just ton of mental illness going on, widely undiagnosed and widely because I wouldn't talk about it. I didn't want to share what was going on with me at that time. And so, you mentioned that hockey was my first drug and, worked for a while. And then that kind of stopped working and I was introduced, into first alcohol and then drugs. And being labeled as a hockey player, I kind of had these barriers for myself where, I don't do these things. Drinking was widely accepted as it is in our society, as it is in hockey and everywhere. So that, to me was okay. But as far as the drugs go, I had a zero tolerance for that. I didn't hang out with people that did drugs. I was not that guy. Once I graduated high school, that kind of all changed. I started to drift away from the certain crowd that I was hanging out with and being introduced to new people, and started to break down some of those rules or barriers that I had for myself. And that's where the cocaine really came into play. And I mean, I tell you, it was it was, at the time, I thought it was everything I was looking for. Now I don't need to go have a stick in my hand. I don't need to train. I don't need to put on skates to get this relief that I was just craving. Right. It was so, it was just easy. I could just, take this drugs, and it was fun at first. Obviously we have to remember that, as terrible as drugs are, and I'm going to continue and to share my story with addiction and mental illness, but there's an important piece that people don't realize. By the end of my addiction, I mean, it didn't take long for it to get there, but at the beginning, it was fun. It did something. It rewarded some part in my brain, and it became addicting. And so, we have to remember that as horrible as they are, there's also benefits to doing drugs. Otherwise, people wouldn't do them. And so, I was with the addictive personality that I had, and just the pressures of hockey and all of that, I really started to fall into addiction, and was still able to sign a professional contract with the Tampa Bay Lightning, and didn't train at all when I should have been training. Again, going back to never believing in myself, never allowing myself to be like, hey, you know what, maybe you are good enough, maybe you do deserve this. Still hadn't told anybody that I'd been sexually abused or anything like that. And a knee injury my first year pro led me to the painkiller OxyContin, like you mentioned. And I'll tell you, if I thought cocaine was doing it for me, OxyContin was a whole nother ball game, not just because of the physical dependency, but because of what it did to my brain. And since, then I've also, done a lot of research and been to rehab several times and all of that. And the thing that maybe a lot of people don't know is that as much as these painkillers are for physical pain, they do a great job on emotional pain. And so, did it help with the knee at first? Sure it did. But I became physically dependent on it, emotionally dependent on it, because take this pill and everything goes away. All the stuff from my childhood, all the mistakes that I made, everything just, they say it's like a warm blanket, and that's exactly what it felt like. And again, it felt good. Otherwise I wouldn't have kept doing it. Right. And so it was something that I was certainly not prepared for or ever would have believed that would happen to me. After a while, your prescription gets cut off because you're lying for more and just scheming, and doctors' red flags go up until finally they're like, hey, I'm not going to risk my license on keep refilling your prescription, and which I completely understand. So what do we do? A lot of us in that situation, we turn to the street. And so, I stuck with the pills for a while until they became very hard to find. By this time I was severely addicted, could not go any longer than 5 or 6 hours with taking a couple, 80 milligram OxyContin pills, which is a very high dose. I was taking anywhere from, 12 to 14 of them a day. It was costing me a fortune, and it was getting harder to find. These people that I now was hanging out with to try to get the pills off the street, Clay, were a lot of them were into other things and harder drugs. And there was a gentleman that was always using heroin. Whenever I would go see him to get the pills from him, he was basically selling the pills to support his heroin habit. And he would always offer it to me. And I'm like, no, not going to ever happen. That is just never going to happen. Not a chance. And one day, couldn't find pills anywhere, and I was very, very, very ill, going through withdrawal. And that same guy was, called me and was like, well, come see me. And I was under the impression that he was going to have some pills. He didn't. And that was the first day that I ever did heroin. And that was the beginning of the end of my Oxycontin days. And I was an instant switch to heroin. I had no idea how readily available it was. I was very naive to the world of drugs and the underworld, we'll call it. That was, that quickly changed. Very, very quickly changed. I was now, doing things that I would never imagine myself doing, as I think a lot of people in recovery or even in addiction will say. And I think some people may never understand how people can get there. And I think it's an important piece to just try to educate those that this can happen to anybody. And, the heroin changed to fentanyl and I started to overdose a lot. I ended up in the psych ward several times, spent a year in the psych ward with, 3 months, 6 months, never all at once, but at different times, multiple suicide attempts, no longer playing hockey, like you mentioned. Fentanyl came around and heroin was virtually impossible to find and lost a lot of friends to overdose. I overdosed over 10 times. And by this time, 2015, I was homeless on the streets of Vancouver on Hastings. And if anybody doesn't know what Hastings Street in Vancouver is, I would just strongly suggest that you go to Google and just search Hastings in Vancouver. If you don't know that a place like this exists in Canada or even North America, it'll really blow your mind. And so I was homeless down there for 10 months. It's where you go to die pretty much. When you get there, most people don't make it out. I now turned to a life of crime, another thing that I would have imagined doing. But that's the power of addiction. And it was a progression, from 2011 to 2015. It took 4 years to really get there. Same thing with the intravenous use. I was now an IV drug user, and I speak candidly, and I do this so that people can see it its entirety. I was on the brink of the NHL following my dreams of childhood, and now I'm homeless, addicted to pretty much every drug and using needles and committing crimes. I was eventually arrested several times. They released me, get out, go back, till finally they were like, yeah, you're not getting out. You're going to go to jail for 2 years. Actually, they said 4 years at first, and I just couldn't believe it. It was front page news in the both major Vancouver newspapers. Ex-hockey pro sentenced to jail, and obviously did a huge amount of damage to my family name and my children, and just it was a terrible time. After I got out, I moved to Ontario, where I live now, Clay, and unfortunately, my addiction followed me out here as well. 6 months of living in Ontario, I was once again back in jail here in Ontario, and this time for a year. I did some soul searching while I was in there, but it's hard when you're in a system like that. Most people in there will never find a way out of that life, whether it be in there or on the street, and they continually come in. And I started to see that in my life, and but I was released. I got right back into the same stuff, all the bad stuff I was doing, from crimes and drug dealing and everything that I could do. I tried everything to support my drug habit and remain a drug addict, because I felt that's what now I deserved, and this would be my life forever. And I have this criminal record, and I'm a disgrace to my family, a disgrace to my hometown, to my kids, to the hockey community, to everything. But I made a decision in February of 2020 that I'm really going to try to get clean, and I didn't know what that looked like. It didn't entail rehab this time. I tried rehab, 4 or 5 times before that. Probably went to detox another 10 times, and I was lucky where I was living with my girlfriend's family up in Muskoka, near a lake, and my old junior team sent me a pair of skates and said, "Hey, you should probably get back on the ice. That's where you belong." And so at the very end of the winter of 2020, I decided to put those skates on with about a week left of skating on the lake. And I literally skated down my girlfriend's parents' driveway, because it was ice, right onto the lake. It was pretty cool. And I knew in that moment that I needed to do something to connect back with the game of hockey. But I'll tell you what, I was very nervous, very unsure how I would ever go about doing that. And it ended up, being in the form of a podcast. And the whole idea was to share my story in the hope that I could help just one other person. And the response pretty much instantaneously was overwhelming. It was originally called Hockey to Heroin, The Road to Recovery, a very hard-hitting name. I think it caught people's attention. It's now called Hockey to Hell and Back. I've changed it now that I've established myself and realized that, Hockey to Hell and Back maybe has a more impact and people can really understand. More people can relate to hell and back, certainly in the hockey community and out. But, that podcast pretty much saved my life. It allowed me to start to make these connections again in the hockey world, some that I had before and many that I did not have before. But Clay, what I realized early on in my podcasting journey, it's been over a year now. I've done over 100 podcasts. I produce my own shows and do all that. I borrowed a computer at the very beginning of my girlfriend's mom's computer. I had nothing. I barely had any clothes when I started this podcast. And, but what I really started to realize, Clay, was that I wasn't the only one. Wow. And I'm talking in the hockey community. Like, I started to uncover stories of other guys who had been IV drug users, that had passed away from overdose, that had been to jail, that, right from the NHL down to minor hockey. And it's crazy. And so I found out that my former roommate from my time in the American Hockey League actually passed away of a fentanyl overdose. And this guy was drafted by the Tampa Bay Lightning, and just, it really shook me to my core. Later, I found out that my coach, my first year pro, intentionally overdosed, took his life by suicide, intentional overdose. And I was like, man, something's got to be done here. Like, there's too many lives lost, too much tragedy. I'm not one of these tragedies. I should be, with the amount of times I overdosed and all the things that I was doing. And I just started to live with this just infinite gratitude to be alive and to be able to maybe just help one person. And, I started to do more research. I started to uncover more stories about people that I'd never met, and start to connect with their families. And that's kind of where the idea of Puck Support came about. And we're still growing and still trying to iron out some of the finer details, but it's basically saved my life between the podcast, and Puck Support. It's been a lifesaver for me, and I can confidently sit here and say to you, Clay, that I have helped at least one person in this last 14 months. And I kind of set a goal each and every single day to kind of recreate that every day. Can I help one person today, whether it be in the hockey community or not? Being there to listen to other people who have gone through similar things. And what I found is there is so many people out there that have gone through trauma like I have, that have, are battling addiction. And it's troublesome. And we look at the world and the state it's in now, these numbers are only going up. And so I just thought, if I could be just a small light, just a tiny little bit of ray of light to show that, hey, it doesn't matter how far down you go, there is always coming back. Before I let you come in, I will say that when it came to my charges, I pled guilty to everything. I stood up and took ownership of all of that. And I started to try to just do that with everything. I trying to make amends for all the chaos that I've created through my addiction of, 10, 11, 12 years, whatever it was. And I mean, it would take me 5 years to go through all the stories and the horrible things that I did to get my drugs and all the people that I let down. And I lived with that for a long time. I beat myself up over it. I still do think about it. I can't lie to you. Some of it does weigh on my conscience, but a lot of it, I do feel much better about, because I have reached out and tried to make those amends. And I feel that as long as I'm doing the next right thing and trying to be better and just, literally just following my heart and finally figuring out who I am, removing all these masks. I was Brady the hockey player, Brady the drug dealer, Brady the homeless guy, Brady the jail guy. And it feels pretty damn good today to be able to sit back, and sometimes I can even look in the mirror and tell myself that I love myself. It's pretty incredible. Still have a long ways to go. But I mean, it's definitely been a journey. So that's sort of the 27-minute long version of my story, and I hope that it all makes sense to you and everybody listening or watching.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely makes sense. It's a poof, I would say a logical progression of events. I mean, the way that that you lived through each of those steps, um, from 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 the first painkiller to the last jail sentence, they all kind of fell in line. Like, you know, you didn't go out looking for trouble.
Yeah.
You didn't go out to start, and your mind was in the right place. Your heart was in the right place, and yeah, there were circumstances, right? There were some injuries that you were carrying around, this mask that you felt society was making you wear, right? What an awesome place you're in right now, though. I mean, I'm sure you still have um, physical injury to overcome. I mean, it's been a little over a year, but your body's not. Well, let's talk about skating later. But
Yeah.
your body is certainly different than it was 10 years ago, right? And I'm sure there's going to be emotional and mental injuries to overcome. It sounds like you're going into this eyes wide open and heart in the right place. That's a huge thing, right?
Yeah, and I think, I think that's maybe why, and it's true though. And I can sit here and say, like, I'm not everything that I'm doing. My heart is in the right place. Am I rough around the edges? Yeah, you're damn right. I am. I spent 3 years in jail. I was homeless. I've gone through all this thing. There's some things about me, and maybe some things that I've said over the last year, even on my podcast, where people are like, like what? Like maybe they don't always agree with me, but I think they can appreciate the fact that I am genuine. Like my heart is in the right place, and I can say that, like, and that's, to me, I think why I'm doing so well, in comparison to where I was. And a big part of that goes back to being brutally honest. Man, I developed these habits of just doing everything to cover up anything I was doing, because I didn't want anybody to know what was going on from day one when I was sexually abused. And I didn't want anybody to know what was going on in my addiction, at least nobody that I cared about. And that's so why, when you end up homeless, especially in a place where I was in Vancouver, you have to understand that there's literally, with no exaggeration, thousands of homeless people on that street called Hastings. It's an unbelievable place that you just can't even imagine unless you've seen it. But when you get to there, everybody, that's the last place they go. Nobody's judging people. You don't have to lie about anything or cover up. And so if I didn't get arrested, I likely die down there. When I got out of jail after 2 years before I moved to Ontario, I got sucked back down there. It was like this vortex that just pushed me back down there. As soon as I got out of jail, it's the whole little like colony down there of drugs and crime and all this stuff. And can't tell you why, but I just got sucked back down there. And when I got back down there, I realized that there was like over 1,000 people that I had, either made friends with or acquaintances or seen on the street that had passed away. And the reason why I knew so many had passed away is because they had this memorial. So the 2 years that I was in jail, a new type of fentanyl and these harder drugs came out that really started to kill a lot of people in that area. And then we've started to see it really spread across Canada, but it was kind of the hot spot. And some friends that people I would consider friends and acquaintances, and I just felt very lucky. So when I tell this story, I sometimes don't say that I was arrested. I say I was rescued. I don't wish jail upon my worst enemy. It's not fun. It's just like you see on TV, pretty much. All the crazy little intricacies that happen in there, and the rules and the politics, and it can be scary at sometimes. And sure, I was nervous, but I'll tell you what, I'm very grateful for the experience of being a hockey player. I'm very grateful for the experience of being homeless. I'm also very grateful for the experience of going to jail, because I'll tell you, I'm in a much better place emotionally than I've ever been in my entire life. And now I feel like I'm still learning every day to bring these things together that maybe people would look as a negative, and which they were at the time. But all these things, these traumas and troubles and everything. But I'm really learning and continually trying to learn more on how to bring them together, to turn them into some sort of superpower to help people, and I think there's a lot of other people that have done, modeled their life kind of like this after going through traumas and different things, addictions. And I'm guilty. I love a great comeback story. I'm not guilty that I don't like my comeback story that much, but I can understand, people like to see people do, come out of hell. Literally, that's where I was, my arms are all scarred from being an IV drug user. Hopefully they're starting to look much better. But it's a harsh reminder every single day that, this wasn't a dream. I did in fact live that life. And I paid some consequences for that by going to jail and different things, losing my hockey career, and most importantly, my kids, who 2 of them I haven't seen in a number of years, and I'm working towards that. And so, on the flip side to all of the negative, and now being in recovery, the hardest thing, Clay, has been, being patient for things like that surrounding my kids, and having to understand that, wow, you lived this life of chaos for so long, and there's going to be consequences that may last a lifetime. Like there's relationships that I've cherished in my life that I may never get back because of some of the things that I've done. And it's been a challenge to work through that and try to keep moving forward. Some days are better than others, but I'll tell you, I can't explain how or why I was able to pull myself out of that addiction. I really can't explain it. It doesn't make sense. I was very, very, very bad. Even those people down on Hastings that had been down there for 20 years, they look at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? Are you trying to die? And I'd look at them and be like, yeah, I am, because that's how low I got. And so, now I try to just live my life in a way that, aligns with my heart, and that was something that I believe that was always good in me, and people that have known me since I was a kid know that I have a kind heart and I'm generous, and going back to my heart being in the right place, but just aligning my day and sometimes you have to take it minute by minute. I know people talk about this all the time, it's just one day at a time or minute by minute. It's kind of cliche, but when you're living with all the baggage that I'm living with and all the resentments and regret and all of that, it can overload your brain, and it can keep you sick. It can keep you in that way of life. I wish I had an easy answer for people who are struggling, and for people who have loved ones who are struggling with addiction, especially, is that there is no easy answer. There is no one solution, in my experience. But I think, being able to share it openly and honestly, and willing to do the work. I mean, if you look at addiction, I would say 10 times out of 10, anybody who's addicted has an underlying mental illness or some mental health issues. Maybe it's not. That's my experience. Anybody that I've met that's doing drugs is not somebody that's mentally stable and healthy, and that's why they're doing drugs on a consistent basis. It's usually they go hand in hand together. And so, trying to now stay on top of my mental health, getting sexual abuse trauma counseling. That's something that I do now. And something that I was never willing to do. Is that the end all be all? Is that why I've been able to sustain 14 months clean? Probably not, but it's played a big part. It's important to do a lot of these things and exercise, and we'll get into how I've recently started exercising, but I'll tell you that I didn't do much for the last 10 years. And these last couple of days I was out rollerblading, and I'll tell you, there's something to it. There's something to it about those endorphins being released. I felt like a little kid playing street hockey again when I was rollerblading around with my stick. Here I am, 33 years old, with this big handlebar mustache. By the way, I have a mustache because I grew it for Movember, and I woke up December 1st, and I woke up in my bed, and I picked up my phone, and I was on Instagram, and I saw a picture that said, just because it's December 1st doesn't mean that men's mental health issues go away. And I was like, So you're challenging me to grow my mustache for a year. And so that's why I have this mustache. But yeah, I mean, there's something to it, finding balance, Clay. And that was something that I'm still working towards, but I'm in a way better place, finding balance in my life, and finding things that make me happy, not trying to people please and wear a mask to, suit whatever situation I'm in. Still guilty of it sometimes, of course, but doing much better. And it's been crazy, put it that way.
I think we have a bit of a parallel. When I first, the first year I ran the Canal Pursuit, I was doing, I would do a fundraiser each year for a different charity. And the Canal Pursuit year, it was mental health. But the more I learned about what's going on in Canada, what services are generally available to people, what things people are dealing with, and how Canada's mental health care system is let's say in its infancy, needs a lot of work, right? And how little we know about how our brains work and the whole mind-body connection. The more I got into that, the more I realized it needs a lot more work, right? There needs to be some advocacy to get people to stop holding it in. So part of my work has been just talking to people, right? Getting people to talk, trying to help end the stigma. And I think you're saying the same thing as you talk to, right on, as you talk to and learned about hockey players that have been in a similar situation to you. A lot of it's been hidden, and as you're becoming more aware of it, it seems like there's more work for you to do, right? So it becomes more important.
Yeah, and first off, just let me say, just how incredible the work that you've done, and the Canal Pursuit is something that has now been brought to my attention because we've been connected, and I just admire your commitment to that, and certainly I look up to you, and you should be very proud of yourself for the work. And you're right, man. It's I think that we're a long ways from where we need to be surrounding mental health issues. Having said that, in the last 10 to 12 years, we've also come a long ways, maybe not as far as we need to and wish we were, but we're trending in the right direction. And, I mentioned it earlier, I think a lot of people now are, being, they're seeing these mental health crises in their life or in their loved ones due to COVID that they had not dealt with before. And it's trickling into our youth, which is, it's troubling to really think about it all. And so, every day I'll tell you, since I started my podcast, every day without fail, there's more than one every single day person that reaches out to me in some capacity. And as it stands right now, I get back to every single one of them, and I hope that I can continue to do that moving forward. It starts to get overwhelming, and I've had to sometimes turn my phone on silent or not look at it, because if I don't take care of myself, how can I do anything for anybody else? But I also know that sometimes people just need that support, and so I'm really trying to, like you, be an advocate for mental health and for people to reach out and get the help. But also, I'm a little concerned is there's not maybe as much help and as many resources. And I think the understanding of it, going back to end the stigma, it's really hard. If I was in a fight in hockey and I break my hand and I have a cast on, you can see that. It's like, hey, I got a broken hand, and everyone's like, oh, he can't do this because he's got a broken hand. But if you go, if I go, hey, I got a broken head, I don't know what's going on in my head, people think you're crazy or lying or whatever the judgments will be. So because we can't really measure one person's mental health, it makes it challenging. And I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding. And I would just encourage people to, just try not to judge people. And also, if you're one of the ones who are struggling with mental illness or addiction, I always say this, like, don't give up on yourself. You know, it took me a long, long, long time, longer than I would have ever cared to admit in my past, to get where I'm at, you know, trying and failing, trying and failing, trying and failing. But here I am now, 14 months clean. And I mean, 14 months doesn't mean much to me. It's just a day at a time, going back to that. One day is a victory, and then the next day is another victory. I don't really look at it as a 14-month, you know, celebration every month or anything like that. People that do, I think it's great if that's what works for them. But I know that the life that I lived and the trauma that I've suffered, if I don't stay on top of it, it can come back so quickly. And you know, just keeping my ego in check as far as my own recovery goes. You know, I don't know how spiritual people are or what people's understanding of God is, but when I say God, I understand it as a higher power, a higher being. And there was a very good acronym that was given to me a long time ago. EGO for ego is edging God out. And that always stuck with me. And, you know, just, you know, thinking that, you know, I got it all, I don't need help. And sometimes a higher power can be another person, because you're sharing your experience with them, and you're letting somebody else's experiences come into your life. And, you know, for me, I'm pretty spiritual these days. I don't want to throw people off by talking about that. I know that, I don't know, people get kind of weirded out with that kind of stuff, so we'll leave it. But I just think that, you know, keeping my ego in check surrounding my recovery, knowing that, hey, just because I'm 14 months or just because I'm doing my sexual abuse trauma counseling or doing all these great things doesn't mean that all of a sudden one day I'm going to wake up and I don't have to continue doing all those things. Like, this is going to be a lifelong commitment every single day when I wake up, you know, to remember how far down I was and how lucky I am to be alive. And on top of that, to be in the situation that I'm in, because, you know, I've created this platform and I'm just so grateful that people have given me an opportunity to share my story and continue to listen to not only my story, but then all these people that come on my podcast, Hockey Hall of Famers and people I looked up to as kids are now my friends. And it's remarkable. And I think it just goes to show that, you know, there is love in the world. You know, when you're giving love, you'll get love in a lot of cases. But if you're acting, you know, in a negative manner through addiction or whatever, you know, I used to blame everybody else and never take ownership for my own issues and all of it. And so now that's something that I do, is I just, you know, for better or worse, you know, if I do something, and whether it's right or wrong, I have to remember that I made that choice and it was up to me to make that decision. So, you know, sometimes pressing pause, Clay, and just analyzing a situation. I have a long ways to go in this department, but I have gotten better. Some people listen to this that know me might be like, oh, you still have a long ways to go with that because you're pretty impulsive. But I am able in some cases to just press pause and analyze whatever's going on in front of me and you know, make a decision accordingly. But yeah, it's a lot to unpack there, and I apologize to you and the listeners for blabbing on.
But it's all right. We're here to talk, man. Not a problem at all. I'm glad to have the opportunity to dig a little bit into that world. I think for me, it's a different place than I've been. I have no background there, but I can't say that for everyone who's listening, right? There's a couple things that you and I share. There are certainly going to be a couple of things that you share with other people that are listening. I want to make sure I say right now, I'm going to put some information at the end of the video about Puck Support and how people can listen in to your podcast as well. Just because you mentioned those, I want to make sure that people can navigate to that. So I'll be putting those in the kind of closing credits of the show. This is a show, right? Is it a podcast or a show?
Yeah, it's both. It's both probably. I combine both. But I will say with Puck Support, like, we have a clothing line that, I've designed. I'm not that creative, but it's my backwards. But mental health over hockey and the stigma, but also in all the apparel, we honor one of those individuals, either in the inside of the hat. Or on the inside of the shirt. We have several individuals in the hockey community that have either passed away from overdose or suicide, and so I'm doing everything I can to remember them and honor them. And actually, you can see every podcast I add another picture of one of them. I call them Hockey's Angels that are looking out over Puck Support. And so, yeah, it's a cold, harsh reminder every single day when I'm working on Puck Support. I see the picture. There's a collage of those individuals all together that have passed away tragically. And, every day I put those names in the shirts and the hats myself. I have a heat press and everything. I put those names right in there. That's my job. And I can't help but every time I put one of those names in there, I see my own name, going in there, and how lucky I am that, I'm still here. And I feel a great responsibility to, try to, bring change. This toxic masculinity, especially in the sport of hockey, can be something that is very hard to deal with. It was for me, and that's been sort of the common theme on my podcast. So, just trying to break down these barriers and bring change it's what gets me out of bed in the morning, Clay. There was nothing really in my life other than a kid, hockey, and then drugs into my adulthood because I had to, otherwise I'd be in withdrawal. And now this, I've never felt more focused or driven or like I'm doing the right, exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. It's not happening as fast as I'd like, Clay. I wish I was further ahead and some things would just catch and click, but I'll tell you, I can confidently say too that hockey came pretty easy to me. I don't want to sound arrogant or anything. I didn't train very hard like some of the guys. I put a lot of work in because I was just trying to escape myself. That's why I always had a stick in my hand. But as far as the training goes, it kind of came easy to me. I've never really worked for anything in my life. And now for the last year, I've been working my butt off to get everything that I have, which isn't a lot, but through building websites and video editing and audio editing and making these shirts. And I mean, I'm literally whatever I have to do to bring this to life, I'm willing to do. Mm-hmm. There's something to be said about a honest hard work to get where you want to go. And I'm just enjoying the journey. I really am. And
one of the things we talked about last time we talked a week ago or a week and a half ago was something that I learned on the first Canal Pursuit. If you're doing something that's good and something that's right, people will want to help, right? And I think you'll find people come alongside you and you may be surprised when they show up, when there's the greatest need. But it takes a little while certainly to get some momentum. I think that's why People Talks started, because I was doing this annual run and it was a fundraiser and it was an awareness campaign, but I just had this feeling that there's something I could do that would have more impact, right? One of the things you mentioned was being in rehab a few times and out, and various recovery programs. It made me think a little bit that I was in the self-improvement era in the 90s, right? Everyone was listening to, I think it was cassette tapes at the time, and all of the gurus. So you listen to your cassette tapes and all the self-improvement stuff, right?
Now I'm doing it on YouTube now, not cassette tapes. So yeah. I'm right here.
But the thing is, having gone through rehab, there's all of these seeds that were planted, I'm sure. I mean, you heard all the phrases, you heard all the things, the one-line cliches and all of that. And then in February, you put on a set of skates and went out onto the ice. And it's been a little while since you did that. Can you think of any? Is there something that comes back to you that that you feel is a tool, or was a little help, or a little bit of a crutch, or a little bit of something that's that's supporting your recovery.
Well, I mean, right around that time, my girlfriend got pregnant. That was a big part of really the decision around that. I have a 6-month-old daughter now too, and not being in my other kids' lives, I knew that I never wanted to be that, version of myself again and not be there for my kids and let down. And as much as I wanted that for my other kids, I couldn't, for whatever reason, break those chains of addiction. But you're right. All those times in rehab, all the meetings, all the detoxes, all the time spent listening to Tony Robbins, because I did even before recently too. Um, you plant these little seeds, and for some reason, it kind of all clicked. But I'll tell you that going back to putting my skates on, and I'd ended up doing it every day until the ice melted. And without doing that, and figuring out that, okay, there's a healthy alternative to give me that release, that relief that I'm looking for, other than doing drugs. And, it's as simple as going for a skate on a lake, and it made me feel a million times better than, any drug did. After not doing it, I hadn't had skates on for like 9 years, Clay. So it was, I was like, whoa, 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 am I going to fall? I'm serious. I felt like that at first. And obviously, in a matter of seconds, I was, pretty comfortable on my skates, but it felt first. And I'll tell you, it wasn't a very good feeling. It almost, in that second, I was like, man, I shouldn't even do this. This is embarrassing. But luckily nobody was around. Now I wouldn't care because I'm more confident in myself. But this was early in my journey. And I, again, back then, even just over a year ago, I never wanted to look bad, always trying to please people and make sure people don't, and, I've kind of let that go. But yeah, I think, for me now, talking about it, and sharing, but yes, the podcast that I started, and just the amount of support that has come in, and the people that I've been able to connect with, and share with, and really just be myself and say, hey, this is what I did, or this is what happened to me as a kid. This is the story. Here's the things that I did that are absolutely unspeakable in some cases. And will be writing a book that will share even more of those, where people will likely be in disbelief and maybe even look at me differently, some of the stuff that I did in my addiction. But not having to worry about trying to be something or somebody that I'm not. Being able to be myself and be okay with that. And then all of a sudden see the people be like, hey, it's okay. People make mistakes. It's, how we pick ourselves up and move forward. It's been probably the biggest help is just being able to be honest and sharing with people. And it's interesting, people talk like, that's what it is. Like every time I tried to deal with these things on my own, whether it was my mental illness, which I'm diagnosed bipolar, ADHD, probably some other things in there too. If I go see another couple psychs, who knows? But, I don't label myself with those things. There's tools that I use now to deal with those things. But just talking it out and saying, this is what it is. This is how I'm feeling. And it's so nice to just be able to be myself. That's a really long answer, and I'm not even sure if I answered your question entirely. But that's what came out when you asked me the question.
No problem. Let's see, rehab tips. One of the questions I was going to ask, I think you've already answered. A lot of the people I talk with have recognized in themselves that they're struggling with let's say a mental illness, with something that they feel isn't right. There's a time period when they know that, and there's a time period when they have a formal diagnosis. Did you have that distinction? Like, when was your formal diagnosis compared to knowing when you definitely had a problem, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the first time I was diagnosed bipolar, I was 18, like pretty young. far as mental illness and being diagnosed at 18. Whether or not that was a correct diagnosis back then, I'm not entirely sure.
Mhm.
But definitely those were trying times. From the time I was 17 until 22 or 23 were probably the darkest times as far as actually wanting to take my own life. Like that was at the forefront. And I think the only reason that stopped so much for a while was because I found the OxyContin and the heroin and everything, and it made me feel okay, as crazy as that is. Even though it destroyed everything else in my life, it made me feel okay. And so I didn't think about, taking my own life. But there was a time period where that's all I wanted to do. I quit hockey because of that. I was these suicide attempts, psych wards early in my late teens, early 20s. But, distinction between that, I think I always kind of knew something was wrong. And even after being diagnosed, I never wanted to believe I'm not bipolar. This guy's misdiagnosing me and it can't be right, even though I knew that something was wrong. But again, especially in the sport of hockey and things, you got to be strong and tough, and you can't all these things. So I was like, nah, that's not me. I'm just having a bad day, or I'll get over it. But certainly now, sitting here at 33 years old, I'll be 34 on August 21st, which is a very important day for you.
It is.
Now Pursuit starts, and so very cool. But yeah, so it's going to be 34. But now sitting here, I can definitely sit here and say, yes, there's some major challenges with surrounding my mental health. And, there's whether or not it's bipolar, ADHD, both, something in between, depression also in there, kind of like this, bipolar for sure, probably, but, very manic at times. But I can sit here and say, like, yeah, you know what? I do have these things that happen to me, and there's reasons why, but that's okay, because I'm now doing what I need to do to, manage that without having to, use drugs or anything that's really unhealthy. I also understand that some days may be more challenging than others, but
Certainly.
yeah, and yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that now that it's now that in your life that's out in the light, it's something that you can deal with, and you don't have to hide from someone and deal with it, right? You don't have to do two things to deal with it. You can take care of it without the other crap weighing you down, right?
Yeah, I told you earlier about the front page newspaper story when I first went to jail. That was tough on my family and on me. Obviously, I mean, everybody saw it throughout the Lower Mainland, and it was on global news and everything. And I mean, in that moment, it was kind of like, well, I can't really lie about any of this stuff or even care to lie. And so it was sort of a blessing in disguise, because now all of a sudden everybody knows, I'm an addict and all these things are happening. It could have went the other way, where I never got better and maybe I overdosed and died, or continued to live there. But it also empowered me to be like, okay, well, the story's already out there, so I can talk about it. If I don't talk about it, people can still read about it, or I can share it in its entirety and be truthful and try to explain to people why, and hopefully educate people on how this can happen to anybody. But yeah, it's man, it just, I feel like because of that, and now because there's lots of stories written about me in Sportsnet and Hockey News now, and things about my struggles, and it's sort of given me I don't really have a choice. Now people know I've put it out there, and now I have to live with that. And what it's done is it's created this great amount of, responsibility, accountability. People are always, watching over me. So for a while there, it's like when I say I was having a bad day or a hard day, or if I'm struggling, people automatically now think like I'm relapsing and I'm going to drugs. So there was a time period where I almost wanted to hold back a little bit if I was having a bad day, because it's like, man, if I tell people like I'm having a bad day, they're going to think I'm this close to relapsing. I have relapsed, and things have gotten better surrounding that. I think people have, I've earned some trust back with my family members and those that know me, and even people that don't know me. But yeah, I think the people that know me and saw me in my addiction, if I was to have a bad day and if I was to really have a bad day and relapse, I go AWOL real quick. I don't hold it together. I don't, everything would fall apart instantaneously overnight pretty much. And so, I think I've gotten over that, but yeah, it pretty much put me in this position where by sharing my story and by the news outlet sharing my story, that I didn't really have a choice. And now this, like I said, this accountability, and it's probably been one of the greatest gifts of my whole life, because, now I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I have a responsibility to these people that have been following my story and look to me for guidance now and support. And, if I'm having a bad day, and now I get these messages where people are messaging me where they're at where I was at 14 months ago or 2-3 years ago. And all of a sudden my situation is not looking so bad, and I'm like, man, you're not living in that anymore. You're on the other side. Sure, things may be not great. You wish you had this, or you wanted to do that, or you want this to happen, but man, you have everything you need. You're not using drugs. You're trying your best to make an impact in the lives of those you care about and people that you don't even know. And I can really, like, I legit do things. Everything that I do is not for the benefit of myself. And it's horrible in some senses, but it's a great way to live. And I can't live any other way. So it's, I don't know. It's just been a very fun year.
One of the things you mentioned is the honesty, right? You don't need to hide anymore. There's there's actually negative value in hiding, because someone's going to dig up the truth anyway, right? And I think there's a huge benefit in letting people know it's okay to not be okay. What you're struggling with, a lot of people struggle with. There's going to be those really dark downward spiral days. You've been successful so far in finding the little tools or the spark or the outside accountability to get you up the next morning and out of bed, or 2 mornings from now, spend the day in bed, whatever. You've been 100% successful in surviving until today, and there's hope in that for people, right?
100%. And it's interesting that you said it's okay not to be okay. It is. It's the truth, right? It's okay to have these feelings, to have these emotions, and it's okay to share those with the people you trust. It's in my experience, it wasn't okay to try to do it all on my own. It always ended in disaster. And when I thought things couldn't get worse, they always did when I was living that way. So, I just encourage people to keep talking and to not give up on themselves. Like, just because something doesn't work or go your way the first time, if you're still breathing and you still have this life, this beautiful gift of life that is so fragile, so unique, we're all so lucky to have this opportunity. And as long as we're breathing, there's always that chance to find a way out of that darkness. And, for me, it's like I wanted somebody to come rescue me. I had to be my own hero. And then once I was able to do that, all these other like superheroes have come into my life. I have this great support network of these people that I could have never dreamed of in my entire life. And it's been just such a beautiful gift. But it all goes back to trying to do the next right thing in my experience. So
I think we can both agree that a sound piece of advice, and it's not an easy one to do, but talk to someone you trust. And the someone you trust part is important, right? Because with the stigma that's hanging around mental health issues, if you open up, potentially, if you open up to the wrong person, there may be consequences that you don't want. So find someone you can trust, someone with your best interests at heart, and open up. My wife did. She struggles with depression. She spoke to a good friend who suggested she talk to her doctor and got them together and got some help, right? Yeah. You don't have to open up to an audience like you do or I do. Talk to one person that you trust, right?
That's right. I say that to people. I'm like, just because I'm doing these live videos and these podcasts and I'm sharing it on this platform, I said, that doesn't mean that's what you have to do. But
Yeah.
it's, it's just to share with one person. It can really save a life. And on the other side of that, listening to another person, being there for somebody else can also have a major impact.
Yeah.
Just even sometimes random acts of kindness. It can sometimes make the world of difference in somebody's life. We never know how somebody is doing and how we may impact them in a positive or negative way based on how them in that moment. So, just being kind and just realizing that we're all human. We're all going to struggle at different times. And the worst thing, in my opinion, that we can do is to be judgmental and hard on each other and ridicule each other and hate on each other. Like there's tons of love in the world, but there can always be more.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I haven't told a lot of people this story. So, and I don't do this to boast or anything, but I lived in Thunder Bay for a lot of years, I guess until the mid 90s, but from early high school until my mid 30s, raised a family there. One of my oldest brothers ran a gun shop, and not very far from me, so the next kind of community over. And he had a couple come in and they were looking at guns and thinking about the spring bear hunt, and we're chatting, and my brother, for some reason, my name came up in the conversation, and I was like a nobody down the street, right? My brother is Clay Williams, and the wife's ears perked up, and she said, is that the Clay Williams that was on the Roslyn Village bus into the city in the late 1970s, was 75, 76, whatever it was? And my brother said, yeah, that was probably him. Why do you ask? And she said, well, because I named my son after him. And he said, like I would say, why would you do that? And she said, he was the only kid on the bus who was kind to me. And honestly, I don't think I could recognize her now. And I'm not saying I was the kindest guy in the bus. Immediately, it made me think about all the crappy things I've said to people over the years, right? But you never know what a small act of kindness is going to, what effect it's going to have on someone, right?
Wow.
And it's so easy.
Story. Thanks for sharing that. That's amazing. That's a very valuable lesson for anybody to hear. And amazing. I say this all the time. You never know how you're going to affect, and that just goes to show how powerful it really can be, right? And
there are things that we do we'll never know the consequences of. Make them good consequences.
Yeah, great point. I love that. I've never heard that before. That one.
I think we're gonna say goodbye. I think this is we're getting close to our 1 hour or so, and I think that's an Instagram limit of 1 hour for Instagram video. Anything you wanted to say in closing, or?
Yeah, well, we didn't talk about, but the plan is next spring to be rollerblading across Canada. But me and you will hopefully develop this friendship, and I would love for you to be a big part of it, and at least a small part of it. But I'm really hoping a big part of it. So we'll keep everybody updated with that. And also, I just want to say thanks for having me, and thank you for all of your work that you're doing to create conversation and the stigma, supporting others, and just obviously raising awareness and even money through all that you've done and continue to do, and just keep up